everyone, and welcome to today's SRP education event, Crypto Curious. My name is Sarah Krapek, and I'm the Director of Participant Experience for Strategic Retirement Partners. And as the moderator for today's event, just want to go over a few quick items as we get started. This session is being recorded, and the recording will be sent via a link to all who registered later this week. And while all lines are muted, we do welcome your questions. We encourage you to use the Q&A feature. I'll monitor those throughout Jeff's talk today, and then we'll get to just as many as we can during our time together. A quick note about this interesting topic. This session is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice. Investing in crypto assets is considered high risk, and this meeting is not an endorsement of any particular asset class, coin, or token, but rather just an opportunity to learn more about the crypto landscape and how it might be changing the financial services world as we know it. So with that said, I am pleased to introduce my colleague and our presenter for today. Jeff Cullen is the managing partner of SRP and managing director for the Great Lakes region of Strategic Retirement Partners. He is passionate about the continued advancement of retirement savings and ensuring a better future for all American workers. As such, he's actively engaged as an advisory board member to several service providers within the industry and speaks regularly at plan sponsor and industry conferences. Jeff was invited to Capitol Hill to listen and advise top congressional leaders about the future of the retirement saving industry. Jeff has been an avid investor in the crypto space since February of 2020 and has over 1,000 hours of research and self-education on this topic. He is part of the SRP Asset Allocation Committee that builds portfolios that include an allocation to crypto. Jeff is on the cutting edge, working with other industry leaders to help make these assets more easily accessible to the masses. So Jeff, I want to thank you for taking time to prepare a presentation to share with us today, and I invite you to take it away.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you to everybody who took the time to be on this call. This is a pretty complex topic. I'll do my best to give it the justice that it deserves. So first off, just want to start with our agenda. So we're going to lay out kind of how we got here, what the significance of this particular industry or asset class is, and then giving you some real world applications and what the potential impact on you might be. And then lastly, give you some resources that you can use to self-educate yourself to learn a little bit more about this. So first, we need to start at the beginning. So prior to the early 70s, we had cash, we had checks. If you went out of the country, I'm sure your parents would remember a thing called traveler's checks, where you would bring traveler's check that would guarantee that you had money in an account in the United States that you could then spend outside the United States. I remember being on a few trips with my parents when I was a child where we had to carry traveler's checks. Then in the 70s, the financial system was overhauled using AC, and a few infrastructures were built. One is called the Automated Clearinghouse, sometimes referred to as ACH. So when you direct deposit funds into your bank account or out of your bank account, it's referred to as ACH. And then the International Bank of Settlements, which is similar to ACH, only it's for money transferring between countries. All of this infrastructure was built in the 70s. So just think about where technology was in the 70s. We didn't get the World Wide Web until 1991. We didn't get cell phones until the mid 80s. So the technology back then obviously was pretty antiquated, at least in our eyes now. But it was reliant upon banks to facilitate locally, and federal banks, Federal Reserve banks, to facilitate regionally and nationally, and then also national banks, reserve banks around the world to facilitate around the world. Well, there's a lot of problems that come with that system. While it's a heck of a lot better than cash checks and traveler's checks, there's still a lot of things that are negative about that. The first, it's slow. So this system is only going to settle once every night, overnight. There's this thing called counterparty risk. So let me explain that. So a counterparty risk is when you go into say a restaurant, and the restaurant swipes your Visa card. The Visa network connects with your bank, and the bank says, yes, you have enough money in your checking account in order to cover that expense because you're using a debit card. Okay, so you now pay with that vendor. But overnight, when the settlement happens, it could be that you wrote a check to pay your electric bill that the bank didn't know about at that time. So dollars can be double spent. So this is why one of the major sources of revenue for banks is fees and charges, because people frequently double spend, especially if cash flow is tight in your household. And then what ends up happening is you end up overdrafting, and then there are fees that are incurred as a result of that. Well, this counterparty risk example that I use with just you going to a restaurant and paying your electric bill, think about that on a much bigger scale, where banks have thousands and tens of thousands of clients just like you, where that counterparty exists on any given day is really substantial. Then you add in the fact that they have money going back and forth in and out of the country, then it just amplifies, right? So a terrific example of the existing counterparty risk that is in the system is 2008. So during the great financial crisis, many of you might recall that the banks in this country pretty much came to a grinding halt at one point because the counterparty risk was so significant at one point in time that the government needed to inject cash into the system just in order so that things could flow and things could move. A more recent example of counterparty risk is that this system, it doesn't just apply to banks. It also applies to securities that we buy and sell. So Apple stock or Microsoft stock is a security. Also, that system was built in the early 70s as well, which is why when you trade a stock, it takes a day, anywhere from 1 to 3 days for anything that you buy to sell for that to settle, right? So similar structure, similar issues, right? Slow and counterparty risk. And an example of that counterparty risk is Robinhood locking up last summer or the summer before last, where there was so much counterparty risk in the system, they actually had to halt trading in certain securities because they couldn't guarantee that they actually had ownership of those securities to actually buy and sell. So just an example of how these things play out in modern times. And going back to the slow piece, if you want to know how slow the current system is, try sending money to a loved one in a different country. That process is very arduous, very slow, takes days, and is very expensive. And so just to give you an example, fraud. So think about all of the fraud that can exist when money can be double spent. So banks spend a lot of time and energy fighting fraud so that they don't end up losing money to people who attempt to double spend. Next is theft and confiscation. And so the thing about the system as it is now is we take this for granted when you live in the United States, but outside the United States, confiscation and theft by despot governments and leaders is not a rare thing. Unfortunately, it's something that happens pretty frequently, and so this is a pretty scary thing that we take for granted here, where we look at money in the bank as being money in the bank, and that it's not going to be taken away from us. But all of these things that you see here above, these all cost a lot of money for financial institutions to protect their clients, and as a result, the fees that are in the system to pay for infrastructure and people to help protect you are really substantial. And so once again, the when you're in the United States, the fees are less. When you're outside the further you get away from the global financial centers, the more expensive these things become in order to fight all of these drawbacks that you see above. And the next thing is centralized. So they're centralized in the fact that the ACH world is completely controlled by the U.S. government, and each central bank around the world, centralizes their financial infrastructure. The significance of that is when something is centralized, it can be manipulated. And if you want to know what that looks like, look at countries like Venezuela, where their inflation is over 80% annually. Countries like Zimbabwe, where their inflation is over 200% annually. So there are many governments around the world that would use the centralization of their banking system to basically inflate away their debts. And lastly is the fact that we have approximately 1.7 billion unbanked adults globally. Think about the cost to all of us on this call to have so many adults around the world not able to save money and invest their money. If they were part of the global economy, the entire global economy would benefit from more people being able to participate and save in the global economy. So this is kind of, you probably passed 3 banks on your way to work this morning. We as Americans sometimes take for granted that people in emerging economies where they don't have all the infrastructure that we have, they may have never seen a bank in their life. And so they don't have a place to store value and store the energy of their labor. Okay, so all of a sudden, 2008, we get this pseudonymous person named Satoshi Nakamoto, who releases a white paper in August of 2008. I think the timing of that is extremely interesting because we had just watched the the legacy system come to a grinding halt where it needed bailed out by the government just in order to function, right? So I don't think the timing is, I don't think that's by chance. I think that is completely by purpose. And what the white paper did is it was about a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. So what does that mean? So we'll get into that in just a second. But it essentially uses cryptography, which is just sophisticated math which enables secure communications. When you hear the word secure communications, you should also hear the word privacy, which is really important. And what it does is it takes all of these transactions that are encrypted and communications that are encrypted, and it stores it on a ledger, which another word for ledger is blockchain. So this vocabulary that we hear around this asset class a lot, we hear the word crypto, that's referring to the cryptography or that sophisticated math enabling secure communications, and blockchain, which is just a ledger. Okay, so I want to talk about the history just briefly. This thing didn't come out of nowhere. Going back to 1992, there was a sophisticated group of cryptographers or mathematicians that were trying to design a version of digital cash that we had seen in science fiction novels and movies like Star Wars and so on and so forth, that they wanted to bring it to life because one of the drawbacks of the system that was built in the 70s is there was a loss of privacy. One of the nice things about cash is it's private. Once everything runs through ACH, there's a loss of privacy. Some of you may recently have seen that the federal government, there was a proposal that any transaction in your bank account of more than $600, that they would actually get a notification of that and be able to track that. There's a lot of people, myself included, that think that's an overreach, that the government doesn't need to know every single thing that you spend your money on. So this group of people back in the early 90s really felt that the world needed a digital form of cash that was private. Along the way, several iterations of this were tried, tested, and distributed around the globe. And what Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever he or she is, did is take bits and pieces of the best aspects of each of those predecessors, along with adding a couple of new wrinkles of his or her own to make this new creation that finally finally brought this dream to fruition. So what does it do when compared to the legacy system? First off, it's instant. You don't have to wait for things to settle overnight. It settles instantly in real time. Today, the layer 1 blockchain settles every 10 minutes. The Lightning Network, which is layer 2 on top, settles instantaneously. Complete loss of counterparty risk. You can't spend money twice. So when we eliminate counterparty risk, it's natural that we pretty much eliminate fraud. Theft by individuals and governments is almost impossible because your identity in the blockchain is pseudonymous. And so, the government can't confiscate your money. They can't inflate it away or didn't do any of those other things. Fees are extremely inexpensive because it's completely virtual and doesn't require the massive infrastructure of people and computers that fight fraud and theft and a counterparty risk. It's almost free. The next one is really important. Going from centralized to decentralized and distributed, it means it's the most secure network currently known to mankind, which makes it incredibly practical to be able to store information or value on. And lastly, because the network can be accessed by anybody with a cell phone, it gives us an opportunity to introduce those 1.7 billion unbanked global adults to the financial world and allows them to save their money someplace, store their value someplace, and ultimately, hopefully, become a participant in the global economy, which benefits all of us, right? So think about it like this. So some people struggle with, well, what is it? I think this is the best way to look at it. The World Wide Web, well, none of you is invested in the World Wide Web, but you're invested in the application layer of the World Wide Web. So think about it as the World Wide Web is a protocol layer, TCP and IP, and on top of it, applications were built. So Facebook is built on top of it. Amazon is built on top of it. Google's built on top of it, right? These are applications built on top of this protocol layer. Well, the protocol layer in this instance was government funded. And because it was government funded, you couldn't actually invest directly in it, and it wasn't something that you could own a piece of. Whereas Bitcoin being a protocol layer, there's going to be a lot of applications built on top of it. So this is really important to understand. In the crypto asset world, there are thousands and thousands of tokens and coins. Nearly all of them are part of that application layer. They're being built on top of the protocol layer to provide features or services that the protocol layer does not offer. This is why this bubble that is happening in crypto assets is so concerning. As somebody who lived through the 90s, in the 90s, we knew the internet was exciting and we knew this application layer was really exciting. But the problem is even though it was really exciting, if you look back now, I know with absolute certainty that in 1996, I didn't know that Google was going to be the dominant, omnipotent search application. No one knew at that time that Amazon was going to be the dominant player. Facebook didn't even exist. Facebook didn't come around till 2004. So after all these social media applications were built in the 90s, Facebook ended up destroying all of them, and they all ended up going away. So I think one thing that's really important to understand is all of these applications that we see out there, they've all got a pitch. They've all got the reason why you should own them. But at the end of the day, we have no idea which handful of them are going to survive. If you go back to the late 90s, there were literally thousands of internet companies that you could invest in. Today, there's a handful that survived and are the dominant players, and several of them, like Facebook, didn't even exist pre-2000 blow up of all those. So I am of the opinion, and this is just my opinion, that we are in a bubble where we have all of these application tokens or coins fighting for who is going to be the survivors. Sorry, here I got to go back to see who is going to be the survivors and be the Googles or Netflix or Amazon of the future network of the financial layer in our economy. And at the end of the day, we have no idea who is going to be successful and survive. So we really believe that this is a highly speculative space at this point, because we have no idea who's going to be the Google and who's going to be the eToys, because there will be many, many, many more eToys than there will be Googles. Okay, so buyer beware. So if all this was a payment system and a protocol layer to build on, there wouldn't be such a ruckus around it, right? So there must be something more to all this. So let's dive into that a little bit. So if you think about it, ledgers are simply an accounting of property rights. So think about your own personal life. You have your bank, that's a ledger. You have your credit cards, also a ledger. You have your 401k, a ledger. You have your ownership in your automobile. There's a ledger probably in the state in which you live that says Joe Smith owns this car. Your county that you live in has a ledger saying that you own your house. So we have all of this property kept in all these separate ledgers all over the place, in the state in which you live and maybe outside the state in which you live, that's tracking the things that you own. Well, that way of tracking property rights, is very archaic. A lot of it's done on paper. It's slow. It has risk, right? Because somebody else is keeping track of it, and sometimes people lose things. Um, they lose track of your ownership of things. Sometimes, if you have to prove your ownership of things, it can be very cumbersome to actually get access to those files and those paperwork in order to be able to prove your ownership in things. So one thing that's really exciting about this protocol layer is it basically is just a public accounting of property rights. It says you own this. In this case, you may own that particular protocol layer, which is Bitcoin, but the layer could be used to keep track of property rights for just about anything. And so that's one application that is really, really exciting about this particular asset class, because think about the efficiencies that it could create for governments, for people, and being able to know what you own, being able to prove what you own, being able to prove authentication in things. What if what if you had a house fire? How could you prove all of the different things that you owned of value? Well, if you could have them authenticated and tracked in a public blockchain, you would then be able to show your insurance company, hey, here's all of the things that I had in my house. These are all the things that I own, and I can prove it. And here's and here's the ledger showing the property rights. So this is a very exciting application. But beyond that, perhaps an even more exciting application for some is just this anthropological, which is just kind of a historic human need to store our life's energy. So if you think about how we would have thought about this going back thousands and thousands of years, we labor, produce things, and now we need a way to store that energy. So at some point, maybe maybe our ancestors had livestock or tools that we had made, and then we could use those tools or livestock to barter for other things that we wanted to get our hands on, as part of our life. And then at some point, um, um, that definition changed, where all of a sudden it became that it's a medium of exchange, and a store value, which for any of you on the call that have ever taken an economics class in college or a finance class in college, that's in those first couple of days of class, something that you're going to be told. But one thing that we know about humans, we have always sought out the hardest money, right? So think about it like this: as we went from carrying around our tools and livestock to saying, okay, well, what's something that's smaller and divisible and easier to store our wealth in? Salt. People liked salt. It helped them keep their food longer. So because it helped them keep their food longer, they could store food longer. So salt was a very important commodity thousands of years ago. So that's where the word salary comes from, because people were paid in salt for the labor that they produced. Then that moved to silver and gold, because silver and gold were more dense. They were harder, literally by definition, which meant they were more durable, and could be standardized more easily. So when you standardize something, and every civilization on the earth would have had gold coins and silver coins that were of certain weights, and because they were of a certain weights, it was very easy for you to trade all over the world and be able to say, okay, well, 1 ounce of gold is 1 ounce of gold, no matter whether you're in Spain or you're in China or you're in Brazil. An ounce of gold is an ounce of gold. And so it became something that was very appealing to be able to have standardization of weights, and then divisible around that. But the issue with silver and gold is solving for the portability and theft issue. So if you are very good at what you do and you're a good saver, and you were to store all of that silver and gold that you were able to get for the labor that you put in, you might end up with too much gold. And the problem with ending up with too much gold is, where do you put it all? And it can be stolen from you. And so it becomes a scary thing. So then what we came up with is, we thought, what would be a lot smarter is, let's go put our gold in the bank where it's secure, it's behind walls with armed guards, and nobody can take it. And then the bank will issue notes. And with that note, I can always go exchange it into the bank to get my gold back. If I ever want to take physical possession of that gold back, I can go get it. And that's basically what we used around the world for a couple hundred years. And then something happened, 1971. So in 1971, Richard Nixon famously took us off the gold standard. So what that meant is, you could no longer go down to your local bank and exchange in your dollars to get gold back. Well, what happened? Well, in 1971, gold was priced at $37.33 per ounce. As of a few weeks ago, it was $1,764 per ounce. What does that mean to you? It means if you just left your money in the bank since 1971, your purchasing power decreased by 98%. What did that do? It means that the value of your life's energy was devalued. All of that labor you had put in to save that money, the hard work, your work was devalued. So we as humans have this instinctual thing where we know we want to seek out the hardest money, because we work too doggone hard to watch that money be evaporated away because of government policy, right? So we see many people using this as a store of value, because this is something that I think is taken for granted also by Americans. If you think this slide is bad as an American, just imagine what it would be like to be a Venezuelan or somebody in Africa, who has watched their currency be devalued since the 70s by thousands upon thousands upon thousands of percent, right? So um, we are we have enjoyed having the hardest fiat currency, which is not gold backed, for the last 50 years. But people, the further away you get from trade and being interconnected to the United States and using our money, the worse and worse and worse that this phenomena gets around the world. So a lot of global citizens are using these crypto assets as a place to put their money, where hopefully their life's energy will not be devalued. Once again, going back to what I said a few slides ago, I think unfortunately a lot of those crypto assets are highly speculative, and people will lose money on them. But I think that's a big reason why you're seeing so much attention paid on this particular asset class. So where are we? What is the impact to you as a retirement plan investor? Well, it's early. really early. So here's where we're at. The first thing we have is regulatory hurdles. Here's how complex it is. The different regulating bodies in the United States, from the SEC, which regulates securities, to the Treasury, which regulates money, they don't quite know what to do with some of these because not all crypto assets have the same qualities, right? Bitcoin is a protocol layer. No one owns it, no one controls it. So that is probably much different and might have a different regulatory body overseeing it than some of these other tokens and coins out there where they're centralized and they're owned by certain people and those types of things. And then you have stable coins, which are basically just a one-for-one exchange for US dollars or a variety of other currencies as well around the world. Well, that's probably not a security. And is that the Treasury that has oversight over that? So there's a lot of questions going on in the government right now, a lot of conversations as to who regulates what. And until we know who regulates what, we have a product problem, in that we as financial advisors, we have these different products that we can connect our customers with, from mutual funds to securities like stocks to money market funds to ETFs, which are like mutual funds that trade like a stock. So we have all of these products available, but it's hard to build a product when you don't even know what the regulatory authority is for a particular asset. So we're in this kind of limbo where a lot of asset managers don't know how to bring products to market because they don't even know where to start. So this is something that is, confusing to a lot of us that are financial advisors, and we're still trying to figure out, with a lot of the different things, how to get people exposure to this in a compliant way. So next up is the fiduciary concerns. If you think about the hours that it takes an individual investor to get comfortable with such an investment, think about the concerns that a fiduciary would have. So keep in mind that if you're a participant in a 401k, your SRP advisor is a fiduciary to all of your assets, or to the investments that go into your plan. So because we are fiduciaries, we have to get educated. Then we have to talk to employers, and they have to all be educated and feel comfortable with it. So there's a big education hurdle to climb before fiduciaries feel comfortable, not just comfortable, but confident that they can put this in front of someone, and they're not going to misbehave with it and get themselves into trouble. The last thing in the world, if any fiduciary wants, is for somebody to get in over their head, buy something they shouldn't be buying, and then ultimately expose themselves to a lot of downside risk. So very, 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 very important hurdle to climb as well. And then I think something that's really important to understand is getting exposure to this innovation, and that's really what it is it's an innovation that's going to, I think, revitalize and I think create incredible efficiencies in the financial services space. You don't have to individually own tokens in order to get exposure to the innovation. So I can tell you that within our wealth management team, we have done internal trainings around the asset class. We've done internal trainings around products. We've researched the products that are available, and we are getting exposure for our wealth management clients. When the wealth management client is comfortable, and when they believe it's something that they're comfortable in having exposure to, we are getting them exposure to this asset class, because we have the comfort level internally and training internally that we have some things that we think that we can put into their portfolio that gets them exposure to the innovation, which we think is the really important thing, for those that are interested. So going back to self-education, because it is something that is incredibly important. I hope we did a good job today of really giving you a really, really basic fundamental understanding of how we got here and what this thing is. and hopefully more importantly, what it isn't. But there's a variety of places that you can go to get access to information. Most of those sources are modern forms of where we get our information, which is podcasts and Twitter. And those are places, personally, I mean, I probably follow 500 different people that are in and around this space that are very good educators and do a really good job of informing you and keeping you up to date with what is going on. The three books listed here, myself, I do audio books. I can't recommend highly enough. I think they're absolutely fantastic. And then the podcasts above, you'll have to, kind of search out and find the one that, that you feel really speaks to you. Because I think that's a little different for everybody. We all like different points of view on things. But I think that those are the three places that I would start as far as getting information that you can self-educate yourself. And then beyond that, if you'd like to schedule a free consultation with one of our wealth advisors who can just kind of give you SRP spin on this, how we're investing people's money to get exposure to this, you could use that QR code right there to schedule that. So I believe that I am ready for Q&A, unless there's anything else that you'd like to do, Sarah.
No, that was great, Jeff. And you did a real nice job. We certainly appreciate your comments. And I am going to ask you to put up the QR code again for the consultation, just because we moved
Yeah,
through that really quick.
I'm sorry.
And oh, no, that's all right. And we'll do that while we're getting to a couple questions.
Okay.
And you will not be surprised. We anticipated, what some questions could be coming in. And Jeff said, I know I'm going to get an NFT question, Sarah. And that was one of the first ones that came in. So can you comment on what you think is the biggest takeaway you want us to have as listeners on NFTs right now?
On NFTs, so I get the question a lot, are they here to stay? Absolutely. So think about what an NFT really is. It's
Can
just
you
keeping
first
track of property
actually,
rights.
let's pull it back. What is
Mhm.
an NFT?
Yeah,
You
okay,
talked about
sorry.
a
So
non-fungible token.
so yeah, so an NFT is a non-fungible token. So what does that mean? So a token is basically just a property right. So it's basically something in the blockchain where it could do a variety of things. It could be a contract that says you own a piece of a business. It could be a contract that says you own a particular watch, a really valuable watch, or it could be an authentication of a valuable piece of art that you own. Maybe is the title to a valuable car. Maybe you've spent a lot of time, fixing up an old car, and you had an appraiser come out, appraise it, and you could then get a token that could authenticate that, where that person who did the authentication could say, yes, I concur that this is the value of this particular piece of property. And so they have a lot of applications. I see them being used in a lot of other applications that I think are fun. I just don't know how sustainable they are. Whether they'll be valuable in the long run. I do think where they could be fun and have some value is in experiences. So, like if you were to do a non-fungible token around Michael Jordan's last shot in game six, winning that sixth ring, that would be something that a lot of my friends here in Chicago would love to be one of a handful of people that had ownership, of that photograph. So, so there are certain experiences, that I think, people who either enjoy sports or art or music, that if they could own a little piece of it, I think that could be, potentially interesting. But I think the real valuable use case here is tracking property, authenticating property, and tracking those rights and ownership.
Sorry, I muted myself. We were also asked to cover a bit about crypto mining, Jeff. So could you explain to us a little bit about what that is and what we need to know about it?
Yeah, sure. So crypto mining is different and unique for every token slash coin. So each asset has their own way of doing it. I will just speak specifically to Bitcoin mining. And the reason I'll do that is A, it is by far the largest asset in the asset class. And B, because when you see it in the news about crypto mining, you know, the vast majority of the time, probably 99% of the time, they're actually referring to Bitcoin miners because I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure the only publicly traded companies we have that are mining crypto are Bitcoin miners. So if any of you have looked at investing in those and whatever, they're mining Bitcoin. So I'll speak specifically to that. So what is a Bitcoin miner doing? What they're doing is they're doing very sophisticated math problems in a race to see which miner can solve the math computation first. And that miner that solves the equation first becomes the miner that gets the award. And the award in this instance is Bitcoin. So miners do work, very sophisticated, late energy intense work. For that work, they are paid a reward, and and so that's and so how does that benefit the protocol layer and anyone who might utilize the protocol layer is that you have this army, global army of worldwide machines that are upkeeping and competing to make the network, that protocol layer, as secure as humanly possible. And so that's the beauty of it. The decentralization of it and the fact that it's all over the world with all of these mining machines, solving these problems in a race to get a reward, is what makes the network so secure.
Thank you. And then we have a question coming in from Ryan that says, with Coinbase launching their own NFT marketplace, his opinion is that NFTs will definitely become more popular. I'm not sure that we disagree with that. How do you think the high gas fees will affect this market? And just maybe some commentary around the energy um, of the energy usage in the space.
Yeah. So I'm going to take those in two parts. So gas fees. So let me explain what that means. Is what gas fee is referring to is some blockchains charge what's called a gas fee. So with the protocol layer, it's very efficient. Transaction fees are incredibly low. With other blockchains that are in the application layer built on top of the protocol layer, with some of those, they're far less efficient in the sense that the amount of information they're storing is so much greater that the math required and the work required is significantly more in order to keep the network secure. I hope that made sense.
Mhm.
So because it's so much more work, the transaction fees are much higher. So I think that makes sense, right? So um, so with some NFTs, they're storing a lot of information, or maybe the file size is really large. And so because of that, the transaction fees are much higher. So I believe that I think we're in a race. I think what we are about to witness over the coming, call it 2 to 5 years, is a global race for clean energy. And because if you are somebody who owns these machines that are doing this work, your profit margin is going to be determined by your energy inputs, right? So it's really, really important that you get the cleanest, most renewable green energy you can, because that's ultimately going to be the cheapest, right? So, And I think we're going to see a global race to get access to hydroelectric power, being the single most efficient energy there is. I think you're going to see a race for stranded energy. So what I mean by stranded energy is your house has a constant stream of energy coming into it 100% of the time. And you could be gone. You and your spouse could be off to work, your kids are off to school, there's nobody in the house, there's nothing running except the refrigerator that's using power, but the power available to your house is constant. And because that's constant, there's all of this energy that's essentially stranded and wasted that isn't actually used by your home, right? And then you're all home and then you're actually using all of it, right? So one of the issues, even with nuclear power, is we have all of this stranded or wasted energy that never really gets used. So I think you're going to see a race to use stranded energy, to use wasted energy like methane. So like when oil companies frack, they shoot the gas into the oil well. It either gets the natural gas or oil up, and there's this runoff where there's certain gases that are burned off because they're not usable, but they were used in order to frack in the first place. And so that energy could be retained and turned into mining. So it's this really interesting revolution we're going to see in the energy space. And what gets me really excited about that is, you know, um, it kind of solves a lot of issues around the world without it having to come from politicians or people that are, arm twisting. It's just good old fashioned capitalism doing what it does best, which is, when free markets are allowed to be freed and not manipulated by the government, usually good things happen. And in this case, it's going to lead to a lot of, a race for clean energy.
Mhm. Wonderful. Thanks, Jeff. So I don't see any more specific questions coming in through the chat, but I did want to just ask you to weigh in one more time. If one of our listeners' curiosity was piqued, they wanted to pursue more education or involvement in the space, how would you tell them to take the next step in their own crypto journey?
Excuse me. I would start with, I think the book uh, Price of Tomorrow does a brilliant job of laying out kind of the global macroeconomic big picture right now. For some people on the call, that might be a little too heady. I don't think it's a very heady book. I think it's very easy to understand. You don't have to be an investment geek like me, I think, to really appreciate that book. Layered Money. That book does a really good job helping you understand all of the layers of money we have had from a history of humankind perspective and how we've kind of evolved to this. And this is just the next step in the evolution. And it predicts kind of how the future layers of money will work out in this new digital environment versus the ACH and International Bank of Settlements environment that we're in now. And then beyond that, I would highly encourage people to go to those handful of podcasts that I showed earlier, but don't start with new episodes. Go all the way back to the beginning, because what you're going to find is each of these podcasters is on their own journey. So they're on their own journey of educating themselves and learning about the space as well. And so it's almost like you get to go back in time 2, 3, 4 years ago and learn with them as they come into it. Because if you just jump on the most current episode of some of these podcasts, you're not going to be able to follow it. Half of the vocabulary you won't understand. It's just going to be very confusing. So I think the best thing to do is go back to the beginning in their learning so that you can learn with them. And I think that is extremely helpful. And that's actually what you did, Sarah. And that was really helpful for you.
Yep. Speaking from experience, I went way back and that proved to
Hmm.
be very, very helpful. So, um, well, I think that wraps up all of the Q&A. So Jeff, I just want to extend our gratitude for spending this hour with so many of us this morning passing along some of your knowledge, which I know is quite deep. We appreciate that, and we appreciate so many of you taking time out of your day to join us here at SRP for our final event in the quarterly webinar series of 2021. We are in the midst of planning exciting topics and learning for you next year. So please stay tuned for dates and registration information for our 2022 series. And again, just a reminder that the recording will be sent out later this week. So if you want to listen again or share it with someone, we would welcome or encourage you to do that. So thanks again, everybody. Thank you, Jeff, and we'll look forward to seeing you all next time. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you.